This week we are looking at analyzing intended uses of the program theory and understanding the nature of the situation. In this brief lecture, I will highlight some things to pay attention to in your reading for this week. Chapter 4 is about scoping the intended uses of a program theory. So some of the questions you need to think about in developing the program theory is who will use the program theory? When will they use it? And for what purpose will they use it? For example, you may be developing a theory to plan a program and create something from scratch. You may be using the program theory to manage a program on an ongoing basis. You may also be using it to evaluate a program and whether or not it's meeting its objectives. You may use the theory to communicate program outcomes and also to inform policy. These are just a few examples, and you can imagine different users being involved at each stage of them. In Chapter 5, we focus on the nature of the situation and the intervention. So the book presents a framework that includes understanding the focus, governance, consistency, necessariness, sufficiency, change trajectory, and unintended outcomes. They frame this in the context of developing a program that is either simple, complicated, or complex. A simple intervention is pretty standardized. The steps and activities are consistent. It's helpful to have skill, but it's not required that somebody implementing it will be very skilled. Often these are very restricted to a single group or organization. And basically, a simple intervention is something that once implemented, you can expect the same results consistently. It wouldn't need a lot of adjustment to be implemented elsewhere. As an example, from everyday life, you might think of baking a cake with a cake mix. You're going to use the same ingredients every time. There's step-by-step instructions. You're going to get pretty consistent results. A complicated intervention is pretty much still dependent on formulas, but there's more moving parts than there are in a simple intervention. The person implementing it will need a bit more skill and expertise. However, the outcome of a complicated intervention is still fairly predictable. There may be more adaptations necessary than a simple intervention to implement a complicated intervention in a different setting. So there just more pieces of the program might need to be adjusted. A complex intervention may have some standardized steps and formulas to inform it, but using them doesn't guarantee a consistent result as it would in a simple or even a complicated intervention. Expertise is necessary in a complex intervention, but does not guarantee success. Complex interventions often involve coordination among multiple groups and organizations, and these different organizations are going to have competing priorities. Replication is very challenging in a complex intervention, and to replicate it, a complex intervention may require a lot of adaptation, and it's still not guaranteed to succeed. So I would suggest that most of the interventions we use in healthcare, especially at the system level, would fall more under the complex paradigm. Some things that might happen in healthcare education could be more on the lines of simple, or rather complicated to complex. These are not strict categories. So just use this as a guideline for an example of, as you're developing your own program, think about where it falls on this spectrum. Think of it as a continuum from simple to complex, with different stops in between, depending on what the program is. To help clarify these concepts, you may want to focus on 3 tables in Chapter 5. Chapter 5.1, which is located on page 71, 5.2 on page 73, and then table 5.3 toward the end of the chapter on 90 to 91. Again, not critical. Don't get too hung up on what the transition points between complicated and complex necessarily. Just try to get an idea of what the concepts mean, what they represent, and try to think of some examples from your experience that might fall into any of those descriptions. And as always, use the clarifying questions discussion forum if you have questions about this content, so we can have some further discussion online.